Okay, so what are classes? Now, every time you hear class, I want you to remember this box in here. If you're new to object-oriented programming, this concept could be very confusing. So every time you hear or you think about a class, remember this box. A class has two major components: properties like email, name, address, first name, last name, and a bunch of functions or methods. You can call either. In some books, they say methods, in some books, say function. Doesn't really matter. Now, what I'm gonna do, I wanted to, I want to explain to you using Facebook example. There are a lot of examples about car, engine, animals, dog bark. They don't really make sense. So I wanted to think about your Facebook account. You're a user in Facebook, and as a user, you have your email address, you have your name, you probably have your address, you have your passport, and you have there's a few other properties about you. If you want to convert this, now let's put it this way. If you want to convert this to code, this box, it's going to look something like this. And let me explain it to you line by line. The first thing is you always have to write a class. If you want to declare a class, you have to write a class. It's a good idea to start the first character with uppercase. So in this case, this is user class, you have user. If you go lowercase, still gonna work, there's no difference, but it's a better idea to have it uppercase. These are the properties: email, name, and address. Exactly the same thing that we see here: name, email, and address. Don't worry about public, private, or protected. We'll talk about them in the next video. Now, after properties, as I said, we have methods or functions. Almost always have a construct function in your classes. Why? It's a good idea. Like in many books, they say if you're declaring a class, it's a good idea to have a constructor class. We talk about constructor later, but it's just a good idea to know it's a method that exists in almost every class. For now, that's all you need to know. Now, as you can see, let's say you log into your Facebook account. What happens? The first thing that the page does after you log in, it retrieves your information, your username, your the news that are related to you, lists of your friends, and basically, as you know, if you have done anything with databases, you understand that that is going to be a select statement. So this select retrieves your information from the database. That's exactly the same thing that we have here. So we have a function or a method called select. Same. Then the next thing is updates. You know, sometimes you update your password, your username, your details in Facebook. You have update function here. Same with insert and delete that we talk about later. So basically, this class is like a blueprint that all the members of Facebook are going to use, are going to share. And all of the members of Facebook are going to use this class while they're instantiated through object. I know it sounds really confusing, but bear with me, I'm gonna get there. So the first thing that you need to understand, if you want to use this class, you have to instantiate this class. So as you can see here, this is an object. This could be anything. This could be glass. This could be, I don't know, this could be a gun. This could be anything. I just call object because it's a good idea to just, when you're learning first, to know that this is an object. So what we do, we're using the word new, we instantiate a user class here. So what this means all of these methods and properties almost are all accessible to this object for now. So if we call this object using this arrow, we can access all of the methods in this class. Now if you have another class and call it, for example, admin, right? And this admin has a function that is called Same thing, select, and just here you can say admin selected. You can change this instantiation. Instead of instantiating the user class, you can instantiate the admin class. And if you call this method, this time it's going to call the method in admin class. I hope it will make sense. Anyways, we get there. Now for now, let's go back to example that we had. This was, the object was instantiating the user class. And now we access this method in this class here. Now, why did I put 11? So if you go to Facebook, for example, every Facebook user has a user ID. It could be a big number like this, or it could be a number like this, it could be anything. It's just a number. What we're doing here, we're calling the select function here and passing this ID in here. Now what happens, we need to make sure this ID is a valid ID. For example, if somebody wants to call that and do this, this is not a valid ID. What we need to do, the class, in order to retrieve the information from database about that user, has to make sure this ID is a valid number or integer. So what happens, if you just change it back to what it was, see what happens. This is another class which is called validate. It has a function which is called validate user ID, which is down here. Validate. You see, valid user ID. If you know anything about PHP, this all makes sense to you. This is really simple stuff. So what it does, this class is calling this method. And as you can see, very simple built-in PHP function is numeric. If ID is numeric, it returns true. And if it returns true, it echoes success and goes to retrieve that information for that user from the database. So I have that thing here. I don't know why this thing got all the way there. So what is going to happen right now, if you refresh, it's a success as we expected, because once we instantiate it, so this object has access to all of these functions and properties here, except probably protected that we talk about later. And once we echo select method here and pass this ID to it, it's obviously going to validate. Validation from here returns true because it's a valid number and does print success. Now let's see what happens if we pass nothing. Of course, we're going to get a warning that says missing argument for user select, because select is expecting ID to come here. So we go back here and we put that back. Now see what happens if we post some string in there. As you can see, we get invalid user ID. What happened? How did it go there? So what happened? Again, we instantiated this class. We're calling the select method, passing the ID, and validation here fails because ID that we are passing is not numeric. So it returns false. And if it returns false, it's gonna call the invalid user function in the error class, which is down here, which says invalid user ID. So basically, to just wrap it up one more time, a class is always a box. Always remember, a class is a box. It has properties and it has methods and functions. These are methods and functions, and these are properties. Don't worry about these little guys in here. I'm going to talk to you about them later. Now, you can instantiate a class using new, and you can access the functions or methods in a class using this little arrow.